want to make sure that I thank all of you for being here today, and especially thank the Chamber for putting on an event like today. It gives candidates and statewide officials an opportunity to both convey a message, but also to listen, to hear from you what you want to see from your Attorney General, what you want to see from your next governor. You know, I'm all smiles today because I started the morning off great. He mentioned Michael. So Michael's 13. He's going to turn 14 and wants to start driving January 20th. But I'm still getting to drive him to school. So I got to take Michael and little Isabella, age 11, to middle school today. And I got him there on time. I believe Michael's socks are all matching. So I've had a successful morning so far. I wanted to do a little bit of talk about the governor's race. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the current events that you're hearing in the news on the Attorney General's office, focus on some legislation, but really open it up to you, to listen to you about what areas you want to have a conversation about, and to frankly help me better do my job. When you look at what's happening across our state right now, one of the biggest press questions that I've been receiving today deals with what happened on New Year's Day. You may have heard that at noon on New Year's Day there was a vehicle traveling on I-90 by Spearfish. It was traveling over 100 miles an hour. Ultimately, after a pursuit all the way to Rapid City, law enforcement did an excellent job of stopping that vehicle. That pursuit was going over 118 miles per hour, and they put the strips out and stopped it, and then caught the individual that was fleeing. We ultimately discovered that he had a body in the back of his vehicle. It was a 58-year-old lady, Michelle Walsh, from California, and we have been working with California authorities. There are 3 detectives that came to South Dakota working hand in hand with us. We've notified her next of kin. We've completed an autopsy, and it's an ongoing investigation. The other thing that we announced today is Blue Alert. I think most of you are familiar with Amber Alert. It's when we have a missing child. We're able to tap into all of the state system, local government level, the media, for help. Bloggers, everybody gets the notice that we have a child missing. We do that for an endangered person, missing people. We now do it for law enforcement officers. Whenever there's a threat or harm to a law enforcement officer, there'll be a blue alert to let everybody in the public know of the dangers that are out there. I mean, our men and women in law enforcement have dangerous jobs. And anything that I can do as Attorney General to help better protect them, to get the word out if there's a situation one of them is harmed, that's what the Blue Alert is for. And we've had those happen. We had it with the trooper that was shot over by Kimball. We recently had it with the trial that happened in Rapid City, where State Attorney Vargo did an excellent job of convicting the individual that assaulted Trooper Bader. So we've had those instances in South Dakota where, unfortunately, we may well have to use this alert, but it will be a good thing. You've also maybe recently heard about the Attorney General's legislative package. And every year as Attorney General, I bring a legislative package. I always try to stay within my lanes, I call it. I'm the Attorney General, but I'm also running for governor, but I focus on my job. It's my job that you elected me to do and to serve in. And so I propose 5 particular bills, and they're significant. I was just reminded as I walked into the room that if you go to your newspaper, that it'll show that there were 22 arrests that your state's attorney, Chris White, is dealing with, and 13 of the 22 are directly meth. We have a problem in South Dakota. We have a national meth epidemic going across the nation, and it's affecting our communities. It's affecting Aberdeen and the surrounding area. It's affecting our family structures. It's affecting health care with the ER visits and your insurance premiums. It's affecting our workforce. It affects work productivity. We took bold and giant steps in 2012 when I asked the legislature to put in the pseudoephedrine laws. And if you look at the charts that I'm about to show you, it worked. We're down to less than 10 meth labs a year. And I'm asking the legislature to work with me, to work with law enforcement, and put in strong laws to keep the distribution of meth out of South Dakota. And we can do this. And I think ultimately it will result in significant public safety and health improvements and cost savings. Because if you look at our prison population, especially the women's prison, it's all drugs. Over 90% of the prison population has a treatment component to their sentence. If you look at the women's prison, about 62% of them, their primary offense is drugs. In the men's prison, it's not quite as bad, but it's 33% is the primary. And again, over 90% of all those inmates have a drug problem. And we can stop this if we stop the distribution of meth. And so what I'm proposing is a plan that ultimately, and this is the numbers to prove that we have increased arrests, but to bring enhancements. To basically say that if you're going to distribute meth or manufacture here in the state of South Dakota, the penalties are going to be increased one level. So by example, right now if you distribute meth in South Dakota, it's a 10-year felony. It would be turned into a 15-year felony. If you ultimately have certain triggering components that are known in the drug trade as dangerous, such as cash, weapons, other materials, it also increases yet an additional level to a 25-year maximum. And this one's important because we are seeing the distribution of meth to our children. And we need to do something about it. And here's the opportunity to say, if you're going to distribute meth to a minor in South Dakota, it'll be a Class 1 felony, punishable up to 50 years. So if you're going to do that, go elsewhere. And this is the biggest component. Right now, we already have mandatory minimums for those convicted of these offenses, but they're not applied. They're rarely ever followed or used. And I was your United States Attorney in 2006, and I worked in a system that has what's called mandatory minimums with a safety valve. And what it simply does is says that you will actually serve that mandatory minimum unless you qualify for a safety valve. And as you can see here, this is the federal law. It's been tested and tried. We've used it here in South Dakota efficiently and effectively. Pennington County State's Attorney Mark Vargo, who was an assistant U.S. attorney under me when I was U.S. attorney, talked to West River about this works. This is an effective way to address drug distribution. And this would apply to all Schedule I and Schedule II drugs. What I talked about on the enhancements, that specifically only applies to methamphetamine. This will apply to opioids, which is also a national epidemic coming to South Dakota, and all Schedule I and Schedule II drugs. And what it says is the defendant must have 5 qualifying factors, or that defendant is going to have to face a mandatory minimum. Can't be a prior violent felon. The defendant can't have used violence in the particular offense he or she's arrested for. The offense can't result in serious death or serious bodily injury. The defendant can't be an organizer or kingpin. And the 5th point is probably the most important, and it's a very significant mechanism that has worked under the federal side, and that is the defendant has to come clean with the sheriff and the chief and the state's attorney. Has to tell us where the drugs came from that he or she is distributing in the state of South Dakota, and if they don't, then they're going to serve a year in the state penitentiary. This also is a cost shifting. These mandatory sentences are penitentiary sentences. They're not for your county jail. If somebody doesn't qualify here, they will go to the state penitentiary. I want to quickly go through these others so I can go on to the governor's race and answer questions, but we have been experiencing the national meth epidemic and the opioid epidemic, and we're seeing it in communities with deaths. And you can see it from the chart. This is a Department of Health chart. We don't have the year 17 results in, but having just seen the recent 3 deaths in Vermilion, I have every belief that this is continuing to go in the wrong direction. And so what we are proposing is if somebody knowingly and illegally and for profit distributes drugs to somebody and they die from that felony will be increased 2 levels. And what I give you by way of example, right now under the law, if you distribute methamphetamine, it's a 10-year felony. If you distribute it to somebody and they die from that distribution, you would face a 25-year felony. These are all geared at sending that strong message that if you're going to distribute drugs in South Dakota, you're going to face significant penalties. It's to deter that from happening in our state. Data breaches is something that's on the news every day. Between Equifax and Target, over 300,000 South Dakotans have had their financial security affected or compromised and their personal identity lost. We're one of the last states to have a data breach law. I'm talking to the chamber, and so one of the important things that I want you to know is when I vetted this bill to financial institutions, to hospitals, to retailers, to businesses, I said I don't want it to be burdensome. I want it to be effective but not burdensome. And so what this law does is says that if there is a business, it can be in South Dakota or outside of South Dakota, that loses your personal identifying information, they simply have to let you know. They have to give you notice within 45 days. And that notice can be written, electronic, or substitute. They can use the media as we do under other laws. Secondly, that if over 250 South Dakotans are affected, they simply have to let the Attorney General know that within 45 days so that he or she can do an investigation into that breach. And it's as simple as that. And I think it's something that the legislature will have a good conversation about. I think where the discussion will be is on the 45 days. Some states are 30 days, some states are 60 days. I went in the middle to begin the conversation. Similarly, on the 250 residents affected, that's pretty standard. Some are more, some are less. But I wanted to begin the conversation and recognize that there's going to be 105 legislators that improve upon this legislation. Internet Crimes Against Children is a task force made up of local law enforcement and the Attorney General's office to remove sexual predators off the streets. As you can see from this chart, our operations have been extremely successful. What we essentially do is we take a DCI agent, we use technology to make her look like a 10 or a 12-year-old, and we put her up for sale on the internet. And then we wait for the bad guys to come. I say bad guys because it's typically been the guys. I mean, we've done both sexes, but the arrests have always been with the guys. And we've made 56 significant arrests. The one component that we're seeing a challenge with is on our operations is the argument that, well, there's really not a child. There's no real victim. Well, my position as Attorney General is I don't want to wait for a real child. I mean, if you're willing to, respond to an ad and communicate back and bring cash to the hotel and show up at the hotel ready to go, I mean, we know what's going to happen. And I'm just simply saying in those instances, in order to protect our children, I've limited it to minors, is first-degree human trafficking is a Class 2 felony punishable after 25 years. In those instances, we can still use first-degree human trafficking without there being a real child sexually abused. Lastly, the sex offender registry. I always want to make sure to give the legislature a lot of credit for this. We lead the nation in a sex offender registry. We lead it because we were one of the first ones that were certified. We were the fourth in the nation certified. We have a 98.5% compliance rate for the 3,600 that are part of it. We have our reservations included in it. It works well. But this legislation focuses on that 1.5% that doesn't comply. We want to make sure that we are giving them clear rules and that we are defining community safety zones in schools appropriately. And also that if they don't follow the rules and they're habitual offenders on this, that there's an enhanced penalty. So in essence, that will be the legislation that I plan on working with the legislature on. It's something that I will need the public's help, I'll need law enforcement's help, and ultimately the legislature's help. I recognize that there'll be changes to this, and I embrace that. I truly believe that 105 legislators can make this legislation even better for South Dakota. Oftentimes I get the question, Marty, why are you running for governor? And there's frankly two answers to that. I mean, the first answer is Michael and Isabella, and it really ties into the second answer. As your Attorney General, I fight every day to keep our streets safe and to protect our children. And I want to be your governor that fights every day for their future. And when you talk about future, it's economic development. It's what can we do as a state to make sure we are doing everything so that businesses can prosper, so they can pay good and better wages. And oftentimes that answer is limited government, to make sure government isn't getting in the way of progress. And oftentimes it means being bold. I mean, we depend heavily on agriculture, and it's important that we do value-added ag. I'm fortunate, we have a family farm just north of Sturgis. My wife has a ranch that's operational. I got to learn over Christmas vacation what it feels like to chop ice in cold weather, which reminds me why it was important to go to engineering school and law school. But I enjoy that aspect and opportunity to get back and do that. But I see the opportunities that we have in South Dakota, whether it's the beef plant, whether it's the turkey plant, whether it's research and development of seeds and other things that are happening across our state. These are important. And I can assure you as your governor, I'll do everything I can to make sure government isn't unnecessarily getting in the way, and that we are making sure that we are working to keep those new and better jobs. And sometimes that means housing opportunities in a particular town. Sometimes that means workforce development and working with Northern, working with presentation, working with our tech schools, making sure we are doing what we need so our kids can stay right here. I'm the only Attorney General that's on the Jobs for American Graduates board. It's a board, I believe, with the most governors of any board. There are 10 governors and a lone Attorney General, but believe me, he's not a silent voice. I recognize humbly that I can learn from those 10 governors, and I'm listening. I also recognize that there's resources and opportunities that we can to get our kids job ready to keep them right here. I mean, I want Michael and Isabella to have the same opportunity I had to stay right here in South Dakota. And a part of that component is the next important issue, and that is education. I mean, I've been blessed. I got a great education in small town South Dakota. I got to go to engineering school at Mines and become an electrical engineer. I got to become a lawyer. We have great educational opportunities. Right here at Northern, you produce great teachers, business majors. There are things that we need to make sure we are doing to expand that, make sure that we are making it available to more and more kids. Those are opportunity scholarships, Dakota Core scholarships. We also need to make sure that we bring and fix health care. You know, you hear a lot of talk from Washington about what they're doing, but are your premiums going down? No. Are your deductibles going down? No. There are things that we can do with Medicaid. There are opportunities when it comes to IHS that we need strong and bold leadership on. There's waste in these programs. It's why, as Attorney General, I partnered with the federal government, and we now have a task force rooting out wasteful government spending in many of these programs. And we did it for two reasons. Many of these programs have individuals in need that care about and have to have that help. And it doesn't do those programs and those people any good if people are stealing the money. And you're going to begin seeing cases coming out of that unit that's going to show upwards of over $100,000 of waste going to people that were either working and not being honest about it and taking those monies, or really not hurt. And so it's something that can make a difference. And there's other areas, especially when it comes to insurance and it comes to unnecessary government borders, that we can and should do better on. Public safety, I covered it with the legislation. I just want you to know that if you bless me to become your governor, I won't quit working to protect you. That I'll be supportive of your state's attorneys and your sheriffs and your chiefs to make sure they have the resources and the tools they need to keep you safe, to get us through the national meth epidemic, to get through what hasn't hit us yet with opioids, but is on its way. And then it's that quality of life. It's what we love to do in South Dakota. You know, as your Attorney General, as your United States Attorney, you've seen the leadership that I can show. You've seen that leadership as Chairman of the nation's Attorney Generals. I'll do everything I can to keep protecting our environment, to make sure we get to enjoy South Dakota like we always have. I talked about wanting to open it up for questions, and I want you to really direct the conversation. I want to listen to what you have to say, listen to your ideas, and try to answer questions that you have about what we're doing at the AG's office, the governor's race. Anything's fair game.